He couldn't really tell when things started to unravel. Maybe it was slow. Maybe everything collapsed at once. What he did know, without a doubt, was that nothing made sense anymore. He sat on the edge of the bed, shoulders slumped, eyes fixed on the floor like it was the only thing keeping him from disappearing. The room was dark. The air was heavy. Even breathing hurt. No one will miss me. That thought wasn't new. It had been echoing for days, maybe weeks. But tonight, it felt real. Final. He hadn't eaten properly in days. He didn't answer messages. He didn't care anymore. From the outside, everything looked fine. He still smiled in public, still laughed when expected. But on the inside, he was crumbling. There was no light, no plan, no reason to believe tomorrow was worth reaching. This was the night. No more pretending, no more waiting for something to change. It would all end in silence. No goodbye notes, no dramatic gestures, just stillness. But as he sat in that silence, something stirred, something deep, buried, barely alive. A faint whisper of a voice that wasn't his. If you still see me, say something, just once, and I'll stay. He didn't even know who he was talking to. He hadn't prayed in years, didn't think God listened to people like him. But still, he whispered the words, and the heavens heard. The room was still. No lights flickered, no signs from the heavens. Just silence. He sat there, frozen, almost embarrassed by what he'd just said. If you still see me, say something. The words had come out broken, not as a prayer, not as a plea, more like a final breath. But then, something shifted. Not in the room, in him. It wasn't a voice he heard with his ears. It wasn't thunder from the sky or some angel descending from the ceiling. It was a whisper deep inside, too soft to be sound but too loud to ignore. You are not alone. His body went still. Time slowed. He looked around. No one was there. No shadows, no movement. But that phrase kept echoing. You are not alone. You are not forgotten. I see you. He didn't know how, he didn't know why, but he knew. It wasn't his mind playing tricks. It wasn't imagination. It was real. And for the first time in what felt like forever, he broke. Tears spilled without permission. Shoulders shook without control. Something cracked wide open. A wall that had been up for years came crashing down. He dropped to his knees, not in strength, but in surrender. He wasn't strong enough to fight anymore. But maybe, just maybe, he didn't have to. Because someone, somewhere, had heard him. It wasn't the kind of weight you could carry in your hands. It didn't come with numbers on a scale or bruises on the skin. But it was there, pressing down on him every single day. A weight made of silence, of fake smiles, of unanswered messages, of I'm fine when he was anything but. People saw him at work, at church, even with friends. He made jokes. He nodded at the right times. He even gave advice. But no one saw it. The heaviness, the constant pull downwards, like walking through water with chains on your legs. He wanted to scream some days, not out loud, just scream inside until something broke. But he didn't, because people expected him to have it together, to be the strong one, the stable one, the one who always smiles and says, "It'll all work out." So he held it in, until his chest physically hurt from the tension, until he forgot what real laughter felt like, until he couldn't remember the last time he looked in the mirror and saw someone alive. But after that whisper, after "You are not alone," something in that weight shifted, just a little. Not enough to lift it entirely, but enough to remind him, maybe I'm not crazy. Maybe this pain is real. And maybe, just maybe, I don't have to carry it alone anymore. He didn't know what healing looked like, not yet. But that night, something began. not with fireworks, but with a single thought: I want to live. And for someone who had already written his ending, that thought was a miracle. There was a time when he used to speak up. When things got hard, he'd reach out, to friends, to family, to God. But somewhere along the way, the silence became easier. He had learned the hard way. When you open your heart, people walk in, and sometimes they walk all over you. He remembered the first time he told someone he was struggling. They nodded, gave him a cliché: just be grateful. Other people have it worse. Man up. So he stopped sharing. He tried again with someone closer, someone he trusted. But that too ended in disappointment. The conversation quickly turned to them, their problems, their world. He realized nobody really wanted to listen. They just wanted him fixed, quiet, normal. So eventually he stopped asking, stopped hoping someone would notice. He smiled harder, laughed louder, played his role like a professional actor in a play he never auditioned for. But inside, he was screaming, every day, silently. It's a dangerous thing when someone who is drowning starts to look calm. That's what he became, calm, but gone. Until that night, when he broke the silence, not to a person, but to heaven. And heaven, against all odds, answered. Not through a sermon, not through a quote on Instagram, but through a whisper in the dark. The kind that wraps around your soul and reminds you that you were never invisible. You were just unseen by the wrong people. Some pains come with a label: a broken arm, a lost job, a bad breakup. People understand those. They know what to say. Time heals. You'll find better. It's just a phase. But what about the pain that has no name? The kind that wakes you up at 3 a.m. with your chest tight and your thoughts racing. The kind that makes you feel like you're in the wrong life, like you took a wrong turn a long time ago, and now you can't find the way back. That was the kind of pain he lived with. Not loud, not dramatic. Just quiet devastation every single day. It wasn't about a breakup, or money, or some tragic event. It was just everything. A slow erosion of hope. Like his soul was leaking out drop by drop until he barely recognized the man in the mirror. He couldn't explain it, so he stopped trying. People wouldn't understand anyway. They'd say he was overthinking, too sensitive, ungrateful. So he carried that pain like a second skin. Went to work, nodded through conversations, laughed at jokes he didn't hear. But behind every smile was a scream: I don't want to feel like this anymore. And on that night, when he whispered that broken prayer into the dark, he wasn't asking for a miracle. He just wanted it to stop. The ache, the fog, the feeling that his life didn't belong to him anymore. And when the whisper came, when heaven spoke, it didn't give him answers. It gave him presence. And in the presence of something holy, even nameless pain begins to unravel. He thought he was broken because of what he was going through right now. But the truth? Most of his pain wasn't from the present. It was from the past, from moments that never healed. The smile of his mother when she believed in him, before she gave up. The voice of a friend who said they'd stay forever, but disappeared when things got dark. The time he tried and failed, not once, but again and again, until he stopped trying altogether. He had lived through too many almosts, too many unfinished chapters, too many endings that weren't his choice. The worst part? He never processed any of it. He just kept moving forward, like life demanded. But every time he sat still, every time the silence crept in, those memories came rushing back. Not like a movie, not in clear scenes. They came like weight, like a heaviness in his chest, a fog in his brain, tears he couldn't explain. And no matter how much he tried to outgrow them, they lived under the surface, waiting for moments of weakness to rise up and whisper, See? You're still that same kid. Still a failure. Still unlovable. But that night, in the middle of the darkness, when he asked God to speak and heard that whisper, something shifted. Not the memories. They were still there. But now, for the first time, they weren't the loudest voice, because something stronger had entered the room. Not logic, not therapy, not motivation. Presence. And in that presence, even his memories started to feel different. Not erased, but held. Not forgotten, but finally seen. At first, the silence felt like peace. No one calling, no one asking for anything. No noise, no pressure, just stillness. But over time, that silence became a prison. He stopped answering texts, stopped returning calls, let unread messages pile up. People eventually stopped reaching out, and in the beginning that felt like relief. Finally, he thought, no one needs anything from me. But then came the nights, the long, echoing nights when the silence wasn't peaceful. It was deafening. Every second stretched like hours. Every quiet moment shouted at him with thoughts he couldn't control. You're alone. You're forgotten. You don't matter. He tried to distract himself. TV, music, social media. But nothing filled the void. It wasn't just loneliness. It was emptiness. A deep, aching absence that nothing human could reach. It was the kind of silence that made him question if he ever truly existed in the first place. And yet, that silence became the exact space God walked into. Because when all the voices fell away, when even his own inner voice stopped shouting, there was room for something else to be heard. That one whisper, that gentle, powerful truth. I see you. I've always seen you. And suddenly, the silence wasn't scary anymore. It became sacred. A sanctuary, not empty, but filled. With presence. With peace. With a voice that knew his name without him ever saying it out loud. It wasn't sudden. It wasn't impulsive. It was planned. With the kind of calm that scares people, because it doesn't look like panic. It looks like acceptance. He had thought it through. The time, the place, the note he might leave. Or maybe not. He didn't want revenge. He didn't want attention. He just wanted everything to stop. The pressure, the noise in his head. The constant feeling of not being enough. Not for his family, not for his friends, not even for himself. And on that day, he smiled at people. He replied, "I'm good," to texts. He even complimented someone on their outfit, because no one notices a storm that hides behind good manners. But inside, he had already said goodbye. He sat alone that evening, watching the sun set behind the buildings. Everything looked normal. People walking their dogs, kids laughing down the street. Life going on without him. And for a moment he felt peace, not the peace that heals, the peace that comes from giving up. But just before he stood up, just before he took that final step, a thought slipped in, uninvited, unexplained. What if I'm wrong? Just that. Simple. Soft. But it hit like thunder. What if this wasn't the end? What if the pain wasn't permanent? What if the God he stopped believing in had never stopped believing in him? And right there, on the brink of disappearance, he made a choice. To pray. Not a fancy prayer. Just one honest sentence from the bottom of his shattered heart. And that one sentence shattered the silence of heaven. That night felt different. Not because something good had happened, not because he had hope, but because it felt like a conclusion. Like the final page of a book he never wanted to write. He cleaned his room, not out of habit, but because he didn't want anyone to see the mess. He lit a candle, not for peace, but because he wanted the space to feel still. He turned off his phone, not because he didn't care, but because he couldn't handle the idea of someone calling and him not answering. Then he sat, on the edge of the bed. One last time. There were no tears, no breakdown, just quiet surrender. He stared at the wall for what felt like hours, and then, as if pulled by something invisible, he dropped to his knees. Not because he believed it would work, not because he thought someone would answer, but because deep down there was still a flicker, a final spark of something he couldn't name, something that refused to die completely. And with hands trembling and voice cracking, he whispered the words, "If you still see me, if you still care, say something. Please." Then, silence. He waited. 5 seconds, 10, 30, nothing, until everything changed. It wasn't poetic. It wasn't powerful. It didn't sound like anything you'd hear in church. It was raw, unfiltered, broken. He didn't fold his hands. He didn't close his eyes. He didn't quote scripture. He just spoke, with the little strength he had left. "If you're real, if you're even listening, I don't want to die, but I don't know how to live either." He paused. "I don't have faith. I don't even know if I believe in you anymore. But if you still see me, if you still want me, please, just say something." He didn't expect anything. No light from heaven, no voice from the clouds, just silence. He stayed on his knees, eyes open, heart exhausted, soul empty. And then, the atmosphere shifted. There was no thunder, no flash. But something entered the room, a presence, a stillness that wasn't empty, a warmth that didn't touch his skin, but wrapped around his soul. And then it came. Not in words, but in a feeling so real, it could only come from one place. "I see you. I've always seen you. I never left." He didn't know how to explain it. He couldn't describe it to anyone. But he knew God had heard him, and more than that, God had answered. Not with noise, not with spectacle, but with presence, with love, with a whisper that went deeper than any wound. He had whispered it like a final breath, a question without expectation, a cry without echo. "If you still see me." But now the words echoed back, not from the walls, not from his own mind, but from a place he hadn't felt in a long time, his spirit. Because something inside him responded, not logically, not emotionally, spiritually. He didn't hear a booming voice, but he felt something louder than sound, a truth that couldn't be argued. "I do." He clutched his chest as warmth spread through him. It didn't burn. It didn't shock. It healed, the kind of warmth that melts ice. That breaks chains, that fills the cracks without asking questions. He wasn't okay yet. He wasn't healed overnight. But for the first time in forever, he was not alone. Something holy had entered the space. And more than that, it had entered him. The pain was still there. But it wasn't the only thing there anymore. Now, there was hope. A sliver of light in a room that had lived in shadow. And that question, the one he asked in desperation, "If you still see me," would never have to be asked again. Because in that moment he knew he was seen, he was known, he was still loved, even at his lowest, even at his weakest, even when he was ready to give up. God never did. The air in the room didn't change temperature. The lights didn't flicker. No angel appeared at the door. But something shifted. It was like the very space around him had been rewired, like the gravity of the room had changed. The same four walls, the same ceiling, the same silence. Yet suddenly, it all felt different. Holy. Not in a religious way, not in a churchy way, but in a way that made his soul sit up straight. He breathed in and felt peace. Real peace. Not the kind you fake. Not the kind you talk yourself into. but the kind that meets you where you are. For the first time in years, he wasn't trying to survive the moment. He was in the moment, held by it. And he realized God hadn't entered the room. God had been there the whole time, but pain had blurred his presence. Shame had muffled his voice. Disappointment had closed his heart, until that one whisper, that one crack in the armor, let the light break in. And now, every molecule in the room seemed to hum with something eternal. His hands trembled, not from fear, but from the realization, I've been surrounded by love all this time, and I never saw it. Tears welled up, not because he was weak, but because he finally felt safe enough to cry. No pretending, no pressure, just him and God. No masks, no noise, just presence. It wasn't a voice like the others, not the one that told him he was a failure, not the one that said no one cared, not the one that replayed every mistake he'd ever made. This voice was different. It didn't rush, it didn't accuse, it didn't shame. It simply spoke, but not to his ears, to something deeper, to the part of him that had gone numb, the part he thought had died long ago. And when it spoke, it didn't use many words, just a few, but they carried the weight of heaven. You are not forgotten. He blinked, unsure if he'd imagined it, but the words didn't disappear. They settled into him like seeds planting themselves deep in dry soil. You are still mine. I have never stopped watching over you. Even here, even now, I choose you. He couldn't move, not from fear, but from awe. Because this wasn't imagination. This wasn't a fantasy his mind made up to cope. This was presence. This was real. This was God. And the voice didn't remind him of his sins. It reminded him of his worth, not based on performance, not based on how strong he was, just based on love, unshakable, unbreakable, unconditional. And for the first time in his life, he didn't feel like a burden. He felt like a son, chosen, held, spoken to, by the very one he thought had forgotten him. The words weren't shouted. They didn't come with thunder or wind. There was no lightning across the sky, no earthquake beneath his feet. Just a sentence, soft as breath, clear as truth. You are not alone. That was it. But it broke him. Completely. His knees gave out. Not from weakness, but from something greater than strength. Surrender. He collapsed onto the floor, tears flooding without warning, without shame. He wasn't sobbing for attention. He wasn't crying out of fear. He was crying because for the first time in years, maybe in his whole life, he felt seen. All the masks, the pretending, the smiling, the surviving, shattered in a single moment. There he was, face to the floor, heart wide open, finally honest before God. He didn't say anything. Didn't have to. Because in that moment, there were no more arguments, no more negotiations, no more ifs. Only this. I don't want to die. I want to live, but I don't know how. Please teach me. And even without a voice in reply, he felt it. That's exactly what I came to do. It wasn't just comfort. It was calling. Not loud, not urgent, but certain. A quiet certainty that whispered, you were never meant to carry this alone. Now, give it to me. And so he did. Right there, on that floor. No ceremony, no spotlight, just one soul returning home. He didn't cry at funerals. He didn't cry at breakups. He didn't cry when everything was falling apart. Somewhere along the way, he had decided that tears were weakness, and weakness was dangerous. So he locked it all away. Year after year, pain stacked up inside him like bricks in a wall. Tall, solid, untouchable. And behind that wall, he tried to build a life. But now, on that floor, with the presence of God wrapping around him like a blanket of truth. The wall cracked, and the tears came. At first, just a few, hesitant, unfamiliar. But then they poured, breaking through every dam he had built around his emotions. It wasn't pretty. It wasn't controlled. It was real. Years of grief, of silence, of shame, of feeling like a failure, of carrying too much for too long. Every tear told a story he'd never said out loud. And in those tears, he wasn't falling apart. He was finally being put back together, not with logic, not with steps, but with presence. He didn't understand how it worked, how a whisper, a pause, a prayer could begin to undo years of numbness. But it did. And as the last tears slid down his face, he felt something strange, lightness. Not that everything was fixed, but for once he wasn't carrying it alone. He had felt numb before, detached, like a ghost walking through his own life. But this was different. This wasn't numbness. It was stillness, the kind that didn't feel empty, but full of presence, full of something bigger than him, something he couldn't name, but deep down always knew existed. Peace. Not the peace people talk about on social media, with candles and soft music. Not the kind you pretend to feel just to keep others from worrying. This was peace that settled in his chest, soft and steady, like heaven was exhaling inside of him. No fear, no noise, no urgency, just quiet. Sacred, quiet. He sat there for a long time, not speaking, not thinking, just being. It was like his soul finally remembered what safety felt like. And he realized something profound. He didn't have to do anything to earn this peace. He didn't have to fix himself first. Didn't have to pray perfectly. Didn't have to get it together. All he had to do was let go. And the moment he did, the moment he stopped trying to carry it all, God carried him. That peace didn't promise an easy road, didn't erase the past, didn't guarantee a pain-free future, but it anchored him. Right there, right then, alive, and that was enough. Healing didn't come like a wave. There was no sudden rush of joy, no explosion of light, no instant transformation. It came slowly, quietly, like dawn. The darkness didn't vanish in a second, but the light had started to rise. He didn't jump up with a smile. He didn't shout, "I'm free." He just sat there, breathing, present, alive. Something had shifted. The weight on his chest was still there, but it wasn't crushing him anymore. The thoughts still tried to speak, the doubts, the fears, the memories. But now, there was another voice in the room. A gentler one, a truer one. And it whispered, one day at a time, one breath at a time, "I'm not leaving." He didn't know what tomorrow would bring. He didn't even know what the next hour would feel like. But for the first time in years, he wasn't terrified of it. Because now, he understood. Healing doesn't have to be loud to be real. It doesn't have to be fast to be faithful. It doesn't have to be visible to be happening. And maybe, just maybe, what he had always needed wasn't a dramatic rescue, but a quiet presence that refused to leave. So he stood up, not with power, but with purpose. And the healing began. It had been there for years, dusty, untouched, forgotten, tucked away behind a pile of books, old receipts, memories he didn't want to revisit. He wasn't sure why he reached for it now. Maybe curiosity, maybe instinct. Maybe the same presence that met him on the floor was gently guiding his hands. He brushed off the dust. The cover still smelled like the past, like his grandmother's house, like Sunday mornings when he was still a boy and still believed. He sat down slowly, Bible in his lap, and flipped it open. No plan, no verse in mind, no expectations. And it opened somewhere near the middle. His eyes landed on a sentence he couldn't have chosen on his own. "The Lord is near to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit." Psalm 34:18. He stared at it, frozen, undone. It wasn't just a verse. It was a direct response to the night he had just lived. The brokenhearted, the crushed in spirit. That was him. And somehow this ancient book, this book he had ignored, doubted, dismissed, knew. He read it again, slower this time, letting it breathe inside him. "The Lord is near." He whispered it, not like a question anymore, but like a truth he finally believed. He wasn't healed yet. He wasn't strong yet. But God was near. And that changed everything. He thought he'd just read one verse, maybe two, just enough to say he tried. But as he sat there, Bible open on his lap, the words started coming alive. Not metaphorically, not poetically, literally. Every line he read felt like it was reaching out, grabbing him, speaking to him, answering questions he never said out loud. He flipped the page. "Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me." Psalm 23. His eyes filled again, because that's exactly where he had been. The valley, the shadow, the darkness. And yet, he hadn't walked through it alone. He turned another page. "Come to me, all who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." Matthew 11:28. He had never noticed that verse before. Or maybe he had. But this time, it hit different. He was weary. He was burdened. But now, he was also invited into rest. Not escape, not distraction, rest, real rest. The kind you don't earn, the kind that heals what sleep never could. He kept reading, and the more he read, the more it felt like the Bible was reading him. Every page became a mirror, a map, a voice. He had spent years feeling like God was silent, but now he realized God had been speaking the whole time. He just hadn't opened the book. He used to say God was silent. Used to believe that heaven had closed its doors to him, that maybe he wasn't holy enough, faithful enough, worthy enough to be heard. But now, as he sat there with the Bible open and his soul cracked wide, he realized something that shook him to the core. God had never stopped speaking. Not for a moment. It wasn't that the voice wasn't there. It was that the noise in his life had been too loud, too many lies, too much shame, too much pressure to pretend he was okay when he wasn't. God had been whispering all along, in quiet sunsets, in sleepless nights, in the gentle ache of conviction, in the kindness of strangers, in that gut feeling that told him, there's more to life than this. He had ignored it, dismissed it, explained it away. But now he could see it. God had been patient, never forcing, never shouting, just waiting for the moment he was ready to listen. And the irony? The moment he thought he was furthest from God, on the edge of ending everything, was the exact moment God stepped in the closest. Because that's who God is. Not a distant judge in the sky, but a father who kneels in the dirt beside you and whispers, "I've been here the whole time. I never left. I've just been waiting for you to come home." And for the first time, those words didn't sound poetic. They felt like home. Something changed that night. Not everything. Not instantly, but something deep, permanent. He still had the same job, the same problems, the same history. But he wasn't the same. Because once you encounter real love, love that meets you at your lowest, sits with you in the silence, and calls you by name in the dark, you're never the same again. That night didn't erase his pain, but it gave it purpose. It didn't give him all the answers, but it gave him the presence that was always the answer. And slowly the pieces of him that had been scattered for years began to return. His heart wasn't whole, but it was open. His faith wasn't strong, but it was awake. And his soul? His soul was breathing again. He walked differently the next morning. Not with pride, but with peace. People noticed something. They couldn't name it, but they saw it. A calm, a gentleness, a fire that didn't burn out because it hadn't come from him. It came from the one who rescued him. He didn't post about it, didn't announce anything, but his life started to speak, and it said this: I was at the edge, I had nothing left, and God met me there. He didn't fix everything, he fixed me. Healing didn't arrive like lightning. There was no dramatic montage, no new man overnight. Instead, it was day by day, breath by breath, step by step. Some days he still felt the weight. Some nights the old voices tried to creep back in. The difference now? They didn't own him anymore. Because now, he knew where to run. Not to people, not to distractions, but to the presence that met him in his darkest hour. The floor where he collapsed had become the altar where his new life began. And it wasn't just internal. People began to notice. He was quieter, but more grounded, gentler with others and with himself. He listened more, judged less. Not because he had become soft, but because he had finally become safe. Safe in the hands of a God who didn't demand perfection, but invited honesty. He started walking differently, not because his life was easier, but because now he wasn't walking alone. Old habits lost their grip. Old wounds began to close, not by force, but through presence, through love. Real transformation never rushes. It goes deep. It touches places no one sees, and that's what was happening to him. The same man, with the same scars, but a new spirit. And even when he stumbled, he got back up. Not because he was strong, but because now he knew where strength came from. He never imagined himself as someone who could help others. Not after everything he'd been through. Not after how close he came to giving up. But something shifted when he started sharing his story. At first, it was one conversation, quiet, vulnerable, raw. A friend who said, "I've been feeling like I can't take it anymore." And instead of offering cliches or empty advice, he simply said, "I know that place. I was there. But God met me in the dark, and he stayed." The friend cried, not because he said something brilliant, but because he understood. Then there were more. People who were smiling on the outside, but breaking on the inside. And every time he listened, he didn't try to fix them. He didn't preach at them. He just told the truth. You're not alone. You're not broken beyond repair. There is a God who sees you, who saw me, and he's closer than you think. Word spread, not of a man who had it all together, but of a man who had been held together by grace. He never started a ministry, never wore a microphone, but his life became a message, a testimony written in quiet strength, in honest love, in presence. He no longer saw pain as a curse. He saw it as a bridge, because he knew now the same darkness that nearly took him was the place God chose to show up. And now, he walks into other people's darkness with a whisper on his lips. Don't give up. God still speaks in the silence. He didn't have a platform, no camera, no stage, just a story, and a heart that had been through fire and come out refined, not burned. He never tried to be a hero. He just spoke from the ashes. And somehow, that was exactly what people needed. One conversation at a time, one broken soul at a time, he became the hand he once needed. Not because he was perfect, but because he was proof. Proof that God doesn't give up on the hurting. Proof that one whispered prayer in the middle of the night can still reach the throne of heaven. People would message him, "I was about to end everything, but your words made me stop and breathe." Or, "I've never prayed in my life, but after hearing your story, I tried." And somehow, I felt something. And he would smile. Not because of ego, not because of pride, but because he knew. It was never really about him. It was about what God can do with a life that's been shattered and surrendered. His scars became seeds, and those seeds grew healing in places he would never see, in hearts he would never meet. He had no idea how far his voice would carry, but heaven did. Because when God rewrites your story, he doesn't just save you, he saves others through you. It was never a perfect prayer. Not long, not poetic, not rehearsed. It was just one sentence, whispered in desperation, spoken with what little strength he had left. If you still see me, say something. And heaven did. But what he didn't know then, what he sees clearly now, is that one sentence never stopped echoing. Because real prayers, they don't disappear into the air. They enter eternity. That moment on the floor, when everything in him was collapsing, became the birthplace of something divine. A single prayer that not only saved his life, but became a lifeline for others. Every time someone heard his story and felt hope, every time a stranger whispered their own prayer into the silence, that original prayer echoed again. Not because he was strong, but because God is faithful. Now when he walks into quiet rooms, when he sits with hurting people, when he sees the same look in someone's eyes that he once saw in the mirror, he knows exactly what to say. Not advice, not noise, just truth. You only need one moment, one whisper, one prayer. And if you think God doesn't hear you, you're wrong. He heard me. He hears you now, and he's already closer than you think. And so, his story lives on, not in headlines, not in fame, but in the sacred silence between heaven and earth where a broken man once whispered, and God answered.